The Villiers Report brings into the open what most people already know, that all the main paramilitary organisations which operated during the Troubles still exist. The report was commissioned in the aftermath of the killing of Kevin McGuigan in East Belfast on the 13th of August and of Jock Davidson in the markets in June. The Anti-Austerity Alliance and the Socialist Party condemn both murders, just as we stood opposed to the murderous campaign of all paramilitary groups and of killings carried out by the state in the past. The murders would likely have quickly slipped out of the headlines, but for the announcement of the Chief Constable of the PSNI on the 22nd of August that he believes that the Provisional IRA still exists and that its members were involved in McGuigan's murder. His statement simply confirmed what most working class people in the North believe, that paramilitary groups still exist and still prey on the most deprived and neglected communities. Of course, it's not just a question of Republican groups. The Loyalist UDA was almost certainly responsible for the murder of Brian McElhaga in Ballymoney in January this year. In June, Derry man Paul McCauley died 9 years after being assaulted at a family barbecue. Again, the UDA is thought to be responsible, and recently the UDA allegedly crucified one of its victims, nailing him to a table. The Loyalist Ulster Volunteer Force also remains active. Last year it repeatedly shot Gemma McGrath, a young woman, in an attempt to kill her in East Belfast. On top of this, the various dissident Republican groups continue with their dead-end campaigns. There is a punishment shooting or beating every third day in the North. There have been 600 recorded sectarian so-called incidents at the peace lines over the last year alone. Villiers' report says that the main paramilitary groups and their leaderships are committed to peace and acting to restrain and manage members of their organisations. This approach is not dissimilar from the famous words of the then British Home Secretary Reginald Moulding, who in the early years of the Troubles said he would settle for achieving an acceptable level of violence. Today, the British state has effectively settled for an acceptable level of violence and the existence of paramilitaries, as long as these organisations do not pose any threat to stability and are focused on carving up and controlling working class communities as part of the peace process. Catholic and Protestant working class people shouldn't have to settle for an acceptable level of violence, which is maintained by dozens of permanent so-called peace lines, thousands of armed police and the local enforcement activities of paramilitary groups interested primarily in control of their areas. It should be remembered that in the period of relative peace, 150 people have died since 1998. There was over 1,500 shooting incidents and over 1,000 bombing incidents between 2001 and 2012. Even if yet another agreement is cobbled together, it will not deal in any fundamental way with the paramilitary control over working class communities. Only one force is capable of pushing the paramilitaries to one side and ultimately breaking their grip. That force is a united and organised working class. Working people are united in their trade unions and on many occasions have followed a union lead to strike and demonstrate against sectarianism and the paramilitaries. That is one of the hidden stories of the Troubles and the peace process, is the role of trade unionists in confronting paramilitaries and sectarian killings on a number of occasions. In March 1989, for example, when Socialists and the Mid-Ulster Trades Council called for strike action against the murder of 3 Protestants by the IRA, workers from the Unipork factory and others responded in their hundreds. When Maurice O'Kane, a Catholic welder, was murdered by the UVF in Harland and Wolff in 1994, shop stewards immediately called thousands of workers out and left the shipyard empty. There are countless of other examples which shows the power of ordinary people and the power of the trade unions to take on sectarian forces. Today, they could and should organise against paramilitary racketeering and intimidation. We can have no confidence in the sectarian parties, paramilitary organisations or the British and Irish government to maintain an acceptable level of violence indefinitely. A peace process based on sectarian forces is one riddled with crisis, division and will pave the road back to conflict. An alternative agreement must be built, one based not on the coming together of sectarian leaders at the top of society, but of ordinary working class communities coming together in the spirit of solidarity and being prepared to find a solution based on compromise to the issues that divide those communities. The building of a new type of politics, the politics of a united workers' movement, is necessary for this to happen. That means building a new party of working people. A new generation born since the ceasefires of 1994, will make this happen. Young people in the north are fed up with austerity, they're fed up with living in a socially backward state, and they're fed up in being imprisoned in Northern Ireland's past. They're rightly impatient to live in a society where they have the right to live in peace, free from intimidation, division and bigotry. The sectarian parties have failed to resolve the problems of poverty and division that face ordinary people. It's time to build a movement that will solve those key issues. The Villiers Report brings into the open what most people already know, that all the main paramilitary organisations which operated during the Troubles still exist. The report was commissioned in the aftermath of the killing of Kevin McGuigan in East Belfast on the 13th of August and of Jock Davison in the markets in June. The Anti-Austerity Alliance and the Socialist Party condemn both murders, just as we stood opposed to the murderous campaign of all paramilitary